This is Class 12, and today we are working on assignments 14, 15, and 16. I'm just going to add 14 in there, and also adjectives. It's May 5th, 2025, and this is Jillian Percy. All right, we are going to skip the contact information today. If you're interested in knowing how to contact us, check out any of my other videos, but I need to kind of squeeze in assignment 14 today, so we're skipping it, okay? By the end of today's class, you should be able to write complete and correct sentences, including how to use adjectives, practice brainstorming reasons and examples to support your opinions, learn how to turn your ideas into different types of sentences, and use the format for an opinion paragraph to organize your ideas. We are also going to be working at locating information in a narrative text, as well as constructing a summary of a narrative text. Okay, so we're going to start with working on adjectives. So we discussed them briefly at the beginning of the course. Adjectives are words that describe nouns or describe pronouns. They can modify people, places, things, or ideas. They can describe a whole bunch of things like age, color, size, shape, purpose, number, origins, material, quality, or opinions. They can be incredibly specific, like a black spruce pine tree, which brings up a very specific picture of the exact type of tree you're imagining, or it can be much more broad and vague, like a tall, thin tree, which could be any number of trees, like a jack pine or a poplar or a birch. Now, they are a special type of adjective. Some of these are not considered adjectives. Some of them they are. It kind of depends on what source. But I'm grouping them here because they will normally come in front of every other type of adjective, and you're often going to see them connected to the noun or pronoun that is the subject of a sentence, or other parts, but especially the subject. So they're sometimes called determiners. There are articles, which we've talked about before, a, an, and the. Possessives, my, your, his, her, its, our, their, and whose. Demonstratives, I always think of those as pointing words, like this, that. Those are singulars, and then these or those, that's for plural. Numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to, gajillion. Ordinals. Ordinals are putting things in order, like that's the first thing, that's the second thing, that's the third thing. And then other types of amount words, what they sometimes call quantifiers, like a few, another, several, much, many, a lot of, any, some, or very. So if there's a string of adjectives, these types always come first, okay? Now, adjectives of opinion or quality, sometimes these are kind of grouped together. Opinion is a funny one to me. I think they're about quality, like the attributes of something, but some of them can be opinions. So like if I say I eat the pizza and think it's tasty, tasty's an opinion because someone else, dad, ate it and thought it was terrible. Mom took a bite but says it's greasy. John ate 4 pieces and says it's filling. So all those words in red are essentially voicing someone's opinion on pizza. Now, objectively, maybe that pizza is super greasy too, but there's a little bit of overlap there. You might also be describing the properties of something like shimmering water, eerie night, awkward moment, conductive metal, non-stick pans, those kinds of words. There are a lot of adjectives that probably don't need a whole lot of explanation. Size. For size, remember that not just things like tall and short, but also things like wide, narrow, heavy, light. Age. We often think of age as relating to people, but it can relate to history like buildings or time periods or clothing, things like ancient, prehistoric, or more typical things like young, babyish, elderly, youthful, middle-aged. Shape can include the obvious things like square or oval, but it can also include things like wavy, curvy, pointy. Color, we often get taught in grade school that there's 11 basic colors, but there's literally hundreds of names for colors used by artists and others in the design field. Some are simply descriptive, like red, violet, and others are more evocative, and they're trying to raise a certain image in your head, like burgundy, pine, sea foam, burnt umber. So let's say something like the old tall tree in the yard had leaves that turned seafoam green and silver with the sunset. Okay, adjectives of origin describe where something came from. It could be a country or a region or a continent or even a body of water, depending on what it is. Like I could have Pacific salmon, which is different than Atlantic salmon. I could have a Chinese vase or Swiss chocolate or a German car. Or I could have American cotton or European oil, right? Certain types of wine sometimes are referred to like by the area that they are made in. All right. Adjectives of material tell you what something is made of or from. And if you like look around at your house and your furniture, you might have a really wide variety of materials. Things like a glass window, a screen window, a stained glass window. All of those adjectives bring a totally different picture to mind. You could be very general, like saying it's a wooden table, or you could name the exact type of wood, like oak flooring, pine shelves, mahogany work desk. Metal is another really broad category that you could break into smaller categories like an aluminum can, a copper pot, a cast iron frying pan, a gold ring, a silver chain, a lead casket, or a bronze urn. In the kitchen, you probably also have a wide variety of materials, things like a plastic bowl or a paper plate, a silicone cake pan, a ceramic jug, a crystal punch bowl, rubber gloves, bamboo tongs. The clothes in your closet might be made of a really wide variety of fabrics. This is only a small amount. These are common ones, though. Cotton, canvas, knit, latex, leather, suede, fur, fleece, wool, linen, silk, or velvet. Jewelry might be made of precious stones like diamond, rubies, pearls, sapphires, amethysts, or other gems. Ancient tools and building materials might be made of ivory, stone, bone, antlers, clay, reeds, sod, or thatch. And in modern days, builders and landscapers might use different types of stone like marble, quartz, limestone, granite, slate, as well as many, many, many others. But so there's a wide variety of materials. Purpose adjectives describe literally the purpose of what they are used for. Sometimes they are used so commonly with a certain type of noun that it's considered something like a compound noun. That's a little bit tricky. In the long run, it's not super important as long as you understand that it has that kind of flexibility. Like a picnic basket, right, would be different than, say, an Easter basket or a laundry basket. A computer table, a winter coat, oven mitts, right, completely different than, say, gardening mitts or winter mitts or, space mitts. Gardening gloves, a surgical mask, right, as compared to, say, a Halloween mask, a fitted sheet, a rocking chair, a toy boat. Okay, the next little bit, I'm sorry it's all so small here. It's kind of tricky to squeeze in. So we're going to be covering for assignment 14 a few different skills kind of at once. For reading, we're looking at using our knowledge of the organizational structure, of different types of narratives, of nonfiction narratives to identify the sequence of events and main ideas. I would say including fiction. Use appropriate strategies to locate information in different types of text, including narrative texts. And then for writing, construct summaries that clearly state the main idea and include important supporting details. Okay. So for the first little bit of assignment 14, you're going to need to work on justifying the answer. And we talked about this earlier, I think around assignment 11 or so, where we talked about the acronym RAP, where you helps you write a longer answer. So R is for restating the question, A is for answering it, and then P is for proving it. And it depends what they're asking, right? You might need to prove it from the text, or prove it from your connections to your own life, or whatever it's looking for. So if the question was something like, what is the intended audience for this story? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to restate. I think the intended audience is, and then I would answer it. I would give my opinion. Because then I would prove it. If it's a small one, I might just put it together, or I might add on, right? Hang on a second. I might say things like, another reason is, and then explain, or maybe another example is. Those kinds of things are ways you can make a little bit longer answers when you need to, okay? So this is all about Chapter 2. So if you haven't yet read Chapter 2, now you can go ahead and read Chapter 2 in Jimmy Comes Home. And then we've talked about this before. It can be a good idea to read all the questions beforehand, so you sort of have them in your mind as you're reading. The other thing that some students do is they kind of keep their work next to them as they're doing the reading, and then when they stumble across an answer, they're like, oh, wait, that's the answer I was looking for, and then they just kind of write it down directly. Other people don't like that. They prefer to read it all through first and then go back in and find the answers. So do what works for you, right? It kind of depends. Different people have different ways of thinking, and there's no one right or wrong way. There's just a lot of evidence that shows that if you read the story knowing what you're going to be required to know, that you often read it a little more carefully and understand it a little better. So question number 1 says, why did Jimmy keep quiet when the principal was questioning him at the beginning of Chapter 2? Give evidence from the book. So when it's saying give evidence from the book, don't just give me your own opinion. Check the book first and see if the author or the character lists a specific reason for an action. So a character might say something like, let me see. I wanted to set the fire because I was angry about the bingo money. Okay? That's the character explaining their own thoughts. Okay? And that happens sometimes, right? Other times, the writer will use the narrator or the narration to explain things. Like, something like, Jimmy felt angry and outraged when he couldn't find the money. Suddenly, he wanted to burn the place down. And for anyone who's just listening in the radio community and doesn't know, this kind of happens in the story. So I'm not just kind of talking about fire randomly. It's part of the story, okay? So here, the character is talking. Here, the narrator is explaining what's happening, okay? So either one is fine. Number 2, Jimmy had several different types of emotions when he saw Teresa. What did he feel, and why did he feel that way? Okay, so 2 marks. I'm looking for you to name 2 emotions and give me a reason for each emotion. So Jimmy felt whatever he feels because, and again, in this case, the book definitely tells you. So look for that and figure out why and explain it. You don't want to make it up when you know it's in the book. All right. Number 3, how do you think Peter feels about Jimmy being home? Give at least one reason from the book. So I am asking you your opinion, but I want you to look at what goes on in the book, what people says or their actions, and see from what you're looking at, how do you think Peter feels? Okay? So we've talked about this type of question before. When you see this wording, it does mean that they want your opinion, but it may not be stated directly in the text. It might not say something like, Peter feels happy. Instead, you have to look at what does the character do or say, or sometimes what are they thinking, and you have to make a reasonable conclusion about what the character might be feeling. So if it said, how did Jimmy's Gookum feel about having him home? Maybe I would look at, okay, so Jimmy's Gookum is glad to have him home. I know this because when she first sees him, she ruffles up his hair and says, "Jimmy, I'm so glad to see you." And then later on, she made his favorite foods to welcome him home. Now, I also put the page number here. And the reason is that way the teacher can check if I'm like, hey, I don't quite remember that way. Because sometimes when I'm asking a question, I might be thinking about a different part of a chapter and I didn't notice, oh, you know what? This kind of comes up again in another part of the chapter. So it's a good idea to list where you got that information from so that when I look at it, I can go, I'm going to go check that and see. It also gets you into be a good habit because near the end of this course, we need to start documenting our work a little bit more. And knowing the page number where you got information from is part of that kind of documentation. Okay. Question 4. What are some of the memories Jimmy has about going with his uncle Peter in the past? Going hunting, with his uncle Peter. So name at least 2 details about memories that he's got. And then number 5 is write a short summary of the overall events in chapter 2. Be sure to include all the major events that happen in the novel, but don't include every detail. Okay? So, for this type of paragraph, because you're talking about a narrative paragraph, you don't necessarily need to worry about creating an overall opening sentence in terms of stating the topic. But you could say something like, in chapter 2, here are the events that happened. You would list the important events in the sequence that they happened. You would remember to include characters' motivations or reasons for starting events or for saying things, and any emotional reactions to the events. Sometimes people get so focused on the actions that they don't include what the character's feelings, and it can be a little bit odd to read if that's an important part. Dialogue should really be restated. You shouldn't be stating it word for word. The description of the setting can be stated if it is important. Okay, so if you're in a school in the last chapter, and then in the next chapter you are out in the bush hunting, then you'd want to let the reader know that because that's a pretty important change. Okay, so you want to hit all the important points. If somebody read your summary, they would understand basically all the important stuff that happened in the chapter, but they might not know every single small detail. Okay, that's the kind of idea that you're looking for. So here I'm doing a sample summary of Cinderella, and sorry, I'm actually gonna, I said originally that you don't need an opening sentence, but I'm not sure if I'm right about that. I would say, to summarize Cinderella, okay, actually this paragraph summarizes the Cinderella story. You see, it sounds a bit clunky, but I do feel like it's kind of important to have something there. For us, you would tell me what chapter you're summarizing, okay? After her father dies, a miserable young girl lived with her stepmother and stepsisters, who treated her terribly and made her do all the chores. The prince of the land announced a ball, and he invited all the ladies of the land. Everyone was very excited, including Cinderella, who made her own dress. Her jealous stepsisters destroyed her dress, so she couldn't come to the dance with them. They gleefully drove off while she cried. She is surprised when a fairy godmother appears and magically creates a dress and carriage for her that will disappear at midnight. Happily, Cinderella rode to the ball and danced with the prince, who was dazzled by her. When the clock struck midnight, Cinderella was forced to run away before her dress changed, but leaves a shoe behind. The prince scoured the land looking for the princess, who fit the shoe and married Cinderella when he found her. Okay? So I'm using a story that we all know so we can kind of do the next part, which is talking about, hang on a sec. So what was good and weak about this summary? I made that summary. Okay, here's an actually different one. So this is a summary of relating to chapter 1. We're on chapter 2, so don't imitate this. This is just kind of an idea. Jimmy attempted to steal bingo money, and then he burned down the band office in frustration when he was unable to find it. Jimmy tried to explain that Gary was part of it too, but the police officers didn't listen. Jimmy is now returning home after 18 months in juvenile detention. He feels nervous and started yelling on the plane. No bloody way, they're searching my body. Jimmy thinks that they are trying to catch him with drugs. Okay, so how much knowledge does this show of the event in the chapter? Well, it does include some things, but I feel like it doesn't have everything. So I'm going to put like a little X here just to kind of show I think it's a C as far as that goes. Selection and organization of facts. Oh, hang on. Okay, we're going to just not the news part. Selection and organization of facts. Okay. What did you select? How do they put it together? Well, so it should be one paragraph, not two paragraphs. I don't really explain who Jimmy is or how old he is or where he's from. So I'm kind of leaving a lot of details off. And it ends kind of at the very beginning of the chapter. Like a whole bunch of other stuff happens after this. So I'm going to say the thinking isn't really very good, right? They haven't really included the main ideas. Communication. Did they use full sentences, proper paragraphs, and grammar? Yeah, more or less. I think they've done pretty good with that. I think it's about a B. Now, again, I don't know why that's there. Not the application. Summary, right? So summary, main idea, main events, in order. They've got kind of some of the main events, but not all of them. Things aren't in order exactly. Well, it's kind of in order, but not in order as how it happened, more in chronological order. So I'm going to say it's kind of about a C, okay? So as a teacher, then here's what I would do. Hang on a second, let me just kind of add, can I add one? Okay, well, let me do it. I would go through and put the marks here. So C, that is, and I'd be looking at yours going, are they closer to a D or closer to a B or kind of right in the middle? Right in the middle, I might say 3.25, okay? Thinking and inquiry, oh, well, they didn't do terrible, but they didn't do great either. I'm going to say about 2.75. Poor communication, this one I think they did pretty good, so I'm going to say 3.75. And then application, that one I'm not so happy with. I would say 3. So then as a teacher, I would total that up. Okay, so we've got 3, 3, and 3 is 9, and 11, 12, 1275. Okay, hang on a second. Here, this will work. 1275 out of 20. Okay, so that is how I get across and get your marks. So if you're wondering, that is exactly how I do it. All right, for this kind of stuff. Okay, so now moving on. Now 15 and 16 are kind of connected. Okay, so 15, we use a graphic organizer to help us plan out our ideas for an opinion paragraph. And then for 16, we use all the ideas we planned and actually create the paragraph, okay? So I'm going to skip over the process stages because you should know those by now. We've talked about them a few times. So assignment 15 is really just the brainstorming stage. And a lot of students have not done that. Either they weren't taught it, or they don't like to do it, or don't know how, or they don't think it's important. And they're used to just kind of like looking at a question and just diving in. But then I often find that's usually why they're finding writing hard. Brainstorming at first is one of those things I find people really will kind of fight me on and like not want to do. And then once they get in the habit of doing it, they're like, oh, wait, that made things so much easier. So this is why I'm pushing kind of brainstorming so hard, is I really find it makes a difference to students, okay? Because if you're starting to write instantly, you've got to think of so many things at once. Your ideas for the topic, paragraph structure, sentence structure, spelling, punctuation, vocabulary, grammar, usage. That's why I have a lot of students, and just in general students, not just like my students, but there's lots of students who are very good readers, but still struggle with writing. And it's because you got to juggle so many things at once when you're trying to do writing. So this is kind of like putting down the ideas so you're getting one task out of the way ahead of time. And one way I really, really like to use is graphic organizers. Those are just a visual type of organizer to plan out your ideas. There's all different types of graphic organizers. You've probably used some in school. You may not have known that was what they were called. And they reflect the different purpose of what they're designed for. So like here's an example of one for a recipe. So here there's a spot for the ingredients, a spot for the directions, and a spot for the notes. Well, that reflects how you write a recipe. This is one we've seen before where we talk about hamburger writing, where you plan your main idea, you plan out your details, and you plan out your closing sentence. We're going to use a slightly different one. Not quite as pretty, I'm going to be honest with you there. So here's the actual assignment. It says for this assignment, we are going to use a graphic organizer to help us plan our assignment, our ideas for our writing before we do a rough draft. There's 2 topics here. Pick one of them and state whether you agree or disagree with the topic, okay? And then after that, you're going to need to think of 3 reasons why you agree with the topic and give me an example of each reason. So topic number 1 is all drugs, including potentially harmful ones, should be made legal so they could be controlled and regulated like alcohol is. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Topic number 2, handguns, but not hunting rifles, should be banned in Canada as they are only used to shoot people and create more problems than they solve. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Okay. So I'm going to use a different example because I don't want to give you ideas. Let's say I picked a topic and the topic was the opinion that 1 hour of gym should become mandatory for all elementary grade school students. That's kindergarten to grade 8. I might choose that I agree. Here's my first reason. Because kids are not playing outside after school like they used to. For example, my little brother comes home from school and goes right on his iPad rather than playing outside. Okay? So I would go through. First, I would tell me the topic. Do I agree or disagree? Reason and example. Reason and example. Reason and example. So a reason is if you were arguing with someone, I would say because of this, because of that. An example is more like a real life scenario where that might be important, right? So here I told you I think it's important because kids don't get outside and play much, and then I gave you an example from my own real life, okay? It doesn't have to be from your own real life. It could be anyone's real life. The reason I've got the organizer set up this way is to help you focus on giving reasons for your opinions. Because in real life, we often give our our opinion about something, but we don't always give our reasons. We just say, I like this, or I feel that. Like, I like swimming. I love pizza. But in writing, especially for school, we need to practice supporting our opinions with specific reasons. Like, I like swimming because the water cools you off in the summertime. Or, I like swimming because I am a very good swimmer. Okay? And then once you've got your reason, you want to do the examples. This I find is sometimes the harder part for people. So first I'm listing my reason. I like swimming because the water cools you off in the summer. There is nothing better than coming home from a hot day at school and diving into the pool to cool down. So that's my example. I also like swimming because I'm good at it. Reason. Sometimes I would enter competitions as a kid and it felt so great if I won. So there's my example. The other great thing about swimming is all the fun games you can play in the water. That's my reason. It can be so much fun to play water volleyball or create diving games or play Marco Polo. Those are some examples of the fun games. Okay, so pick which topic you want to argue about, very first thing. So, okay, so I originally had this. It's never appropriate to ban books. My opinion, I agree. 2 marks for that, so don't skip it, right? It's an easy 2 marks. Then think of one reason you agree or disagree, and then think of a real life or an imaginary example to support your reason. And then you keep on going all the way through. Second reason, second opinion, third reason, third opinion, and then you're done. So you should have something that looks a little bit like this, only on your topic. It's never appropriate to ban books. Do you agree or disagree? I disagree. Okay. I think I changed the marks for this, by the way. I think it used to be 5 and now it's 8. All right. That happens sometimes. That's why I say sometimes there's small differences. First reason, some books teach people how to harm others. Example, for example, a book on how to make bombs at home. Second reason, some books teach people how to hate others. For example, Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. There's all sorts of books like that these days. Third reason, some books teach lies or teach that historical events never happened and confuse people. For example, books that are written claiming that the Holocaust never occurred. So yeah, this one, there no longer exists that part. It's just kind of the bare bones, okay? So you have to finish that to be able to do 16. Now, every now and again, I will get a student who writes assignment 16 first and then goes back and does this. And you know what? I can always tell. And the reason is because they're not really sure what's a reason and what's their example. They're kind of all mixed up. If you do assignment 15 first instead, like you're supposed to, it really does work so much better. And then assignment 16 will be so much stronger. Okay? So assignment 16 is turning your ideas into different types of sentences, using the format for an opinion paragraph to organize your ideas, and then writing your rough draft. Okay? So you're going to use all those ideas and examples to create integrated sentences that are detailed and understandable. So here, this section up here should be my opening sentence. So let me show you what I mean by that. Hang on a sec. Sometimes people really struggle with how to do the opening sentence. Now, every now and again we'll say, like, topic A. No. Don't tell me topic A. That doesn't make sense for writing. You want it to be written so that if somebody had no clue, had never seen the assignment, they would know what they were saying. Okay, so I was trying to get it darker, but I can't do that right now. I agree that all elementary students should have mandatory 1 hour of gym at school. Should have a mandatory 1 hour of gym at school. Okay? That's my opening sentence. Then I would go on to my reason. Okay? Yep. Here's how that would look. Many kids are just not playing outside after school or even on the weekends like they used to. My little brother and his friends just come home after school and they go right on their iPads or game systems. Now I want to point out, I changed this a little bit from my original, but that's okay because my original was just kind of my rough ideas. Here, I thought of a better way to say it. That's totally fine. In fact, you want that, right? It doesn't have to be word for word. So, in the organizer in 15, you can write just jot notes like books harm or bombs or whatever. But it doesn't need to be a complete sentence. For a complete or correct sentence, for our organizers and for our rough draft, you really want it to have a subject, a verb, and explain things clearly. Okay? So really important as you move into assignment 16 that you change things from this or even this into this kind of stuff. Okay? So now this is the other part where sometimes people get frustrated because they're not really sure how to make this a new sentence. Okay? There's more than one way to turn these kind of notes into a sentence. I could say something like, some books teach people how to harm others, period. One example is a book on how to make bombs at home. Or I could try and join those two things together into one long compound or complex sentence. Some books teach people how to harm others, comma, such as a book that explains how to make homemade bombs. So it's a little bit different. Okay? One thing to think about as you are writing is using transitional words and phrases. As you move from one example to the next, they really make a difference on how smooth your writing sounds and how professional it sounds, right? That's kind of our goal, is to sound professional. This is a course getting you ready for the workplace, and so if you were to write things for your boss, you want it to sound professional. Okay. So if you're not sure how to add transitional phrases, there's a whole bunch. You could add ordinal things, ordinal where you're putting things in order, like, first of all, some books teach people how to harm others. Or things like, to begin, some books teach people how to harm others. I could use things where I'm adding examples. In addition, as well, furthermore, for example, all those kind of ideas, okay? You can also add more details. If as you're writing you think, hey, I've got some more great ideas I want to add to this, awesome, that's great. Because I mark your final paragraph completely differently than how I marked the original assignment 15. So if you want to add more stuff so it sounds better, that's awesome. That will improve your marks. So here's what I started with. Some books teach people lies or deny historical events even happened. And an example was books written claiming that the Holocaust never occurred. And that turned into, finally, some books should be banned because they teach people lies or even deny that historical events happened. For example, sometimes people write books full of lies to deliberately smear a person's reputation. In addition, there are some books written that claim the Holocaust, which killed 6 million people, never actually occurred. People should have some confidence that what they read is not simply a collection of lies created to harm others. So that is one example. All right. And then at the end, you want to make sure that you have a closing sentence, right? Remember we've talked about how if you're talking to somebody, you wouldn't just run out the door when you finish talking. You would say goodbye and shake their hand and all that kind of stuff. A closing sentence is like that. It's giving your reader a heads up. Hey, I'm winding down. This is coming to a close, rather than just stopping abruptly. Here is one example. There's more than one way to say this. It's important to young people's physical and mental health that they get the benefits that come from getting at least an hour of exercise, right? Or I could make it more obvious that it's my opinion, right? I believe that getting 1 hour of gym in school is important to keep our young children, physically and mentally healthy. Now, this really says the same thing. I turned it around and put the end part at the beginning, and I just phrased things a little tiny bit differently. Either one would be fine. When you're doing your closing phrase, again, remember to use transition phrases, things like in summary, in conclusion, to sum up my arguments, to wrap up, finally, for those reasons. All those things give your reader a heads up. Oh, this is the last sentence, okay? Different writers can tackle the conclusion in different ways. Sometimes they just restate their opinion in a new and interesting way. In conclusion, I do believe that some books should have some form of restricted access. Maybe in the paragraph I talked about, maybe it being available to adults but not kids, or available in public libraries but not school libraries, or things like that. Other times they might relist all the main reasons in a summarized fashion. This is really common if a paragraph was longer or if you're writing like for a whole page. For these reasons, dash, telling lies, stirring up hatred, teaching harm, close dash, I agree that some books might need to be banned. Okay? So once you're finished that rough draft, take a few minutes, go back, make sure it says what you want it to say, and then remember to edit. Okay, remember how in assignment 13 we went through and checked for capitalization errors, usage errors, punctuation errors, and spelling errors. Honestly, for a short paragraph, this is really only going to take you maybe 5 minutes. Okay? But it's worth it if it can improve your marks from a C to a B. Okay? Make sense? All right. So I'm going to kind of quickly, got a little bit more time than I thought. I'm going to go over a few of the possible things that I want you to check. Capitalization. Okay? The big things is remember to capitalize the first letter in everyone's name, a title of a book or a movie or whatever, and at the beginning of a sentence. Okay? If you are editing run-on sentences and you use a period to create a shorter sentence, then the new sentence begins right afterwards, and now it needs a capital. See how here, I can't just put the period here and go on. I really don't need that part, so I would take it out. I would start with it and make it into an I. The other thing I want to talk about is, this sounds kind of funny, but some people's handwriting, they use lowercase formats. The most common way I've seen this is M or with W. Okay, so see how autocorrect tried to change that? Hang on a second. I'm going to do another one just over here and they'll do this, but they'll make it maybe a little tiny bit bigger. I'm going to use the word many here. Many. Sometimes they won't make it bigger at all. Sometimes they may make it a little tiny titch bigger. Let's see here. Will that make big enough? Yeah. And I'm not really sure. Is that a capital? Do they know it's a capital? Because they haven't used the proper capital format. This is especially important if you're writing. Same thing with W. M and W are the two ones I see. Sometimes you might see it with a B or a D or occasionally P's. Okay? So be cautious. If you're using that, you need to make it really big so I know for sure that it really is the capital letter, or you need to use the proper format. Okay, one or the other. The other one I really see is the issue of I. I know in a lot of typing formats, I looks identical to L, but when you're printing, if you're printing, because some of my students do, you can do the capital I with the, sorry, terrible straight line, and then a heading and a bottom, okay? And that looks different than a lowercase. You don't want to have this when you're talking about a person. You would always be using this style. Even in a contraction, sometimes people will forget in a contraction, like I'd, I'll, I've, or I'm. And then the other thing is, every now and again, people will use a capital letter where they don't need one. So in this sentence, I went to go to the park, comma, and then we got ice cream. You're in the middle of a sentence. You don't need an and. You need just a lowercase a there. The other places where I find that is some people are not sure about their B's or their D's. And in school, they've gotten used to just automatically switching to the capital to make sure it's obvious. And I understand that, but it's a good idea to just look it up and make sure you know which one is which, okay? It's easy enough to look up on your phone and get like a little alphabet poster so that you know. One hint, if you're not sure, is lowercase b looks exactly like the uppercase B, but it's missing the top. Lowercase d turns around and faces it. I always think of two people talking to each other, okay? In case that helps. Usage. This is a generic category. It kind of means any type of grammar. So anything grammatical that is wrong, words in the wrong order, every sentence should have a subject and a verb and make sense, Make sure your singular nouns have articles a, an, and the. Plural nouns cannot use a, an, or the. Sorry, a or an, but can use the. And I think we've talked a little bit about subject-verb agreement, I believe. I'm trying to think if that's this or my other class here. Subject-verb agreement. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it and just skip it. Anything we've taught, you should be looking for. Okay? And then commas and periods. Most people use question marks and exclamation points just fine. The biggest error I see is people using commas to join two sentences instead of using a period. Okay? Commas can be used for other things, though. We can use them to separate items in a list, like please buy me milk, comma, bread, comma, butter, comma. It can be used to separate short phrases, like in the summer they love to go camping, to pick blueberries, and to go fishing. But you cannot use it to separate two sentences. If I said, I love my little brother, comma, we always played hockey together, I could not do that. It's incorrect, okay? I'm going to make this a little bit smaller and just kind of point something out real quick. Hang on a sec. When I see that, there's a few ways I can fix that. Okay. I can use a conjunction as well. So add a conjunction, like I loved my little brother and we always played hockey together. Okay? Why is it saying that's wrong? What's wrong with this? Conjunction. I think it's spelled right. Or sometimes you could use a semicolon. Okay? So then it would be the exact same sentence, but you would put a semicolon. So remember, a semicolon looks like that. It's like a comma with a little dot on it. It's kind of like a super comma. It makes it stronger, and it's strong enough now to separate the two sentences. The other possibility is you just make them into two simple sentences and use a period to end the sentence. Okay. That's the other possibility. The other ones are things like dashes, colons, and semicolons. If you're not sure of those, don't use them. That's my basic one. And the other big one is apostrophes. Sometimes people are using an apostrophe to show plurals, but you don't need to. And then usually you check spelling. One thing to keep in mind for spelling programs is they won't catch every kind of spelling mistake. They will not catch words from another language. Place names it's not familiar with, like Pekanjikam or Webekwe. It doesn't know those. They're another language, and it's going to say it's wrong, but it won't necessarily be wrong. Not semicolon. Sometimes you use a word that is spelled correctly, but is not the word you were trying to use. Okay? We've talked about this. Sorry. This one is hyphen. Sometimes it doesn't like hyphens, even when hyphens are okay. It won't catch those. And then the other big one is homophones and near homophones, where a word sounds almost the same or exactly the same, but it has more than one spelling. The most common errors is the ones with two, and two, there, and there, or it's and its. So check for those spelling mistakes. Okay, I will be away for the rest of the week. The classes will still be running if you're listening, but they will be pre-recorded classes, not live, so you won't be able to ask me questions. I will be back next week, and I will be happy to talk to you. If you send in any assignments, that's fine. They will still make it to me. I just may not get them back to you till next week. All right? Take care, and let me know if you have any questions about the assignments.